If you're just joining us, my name is David Brown. I am a board member here at the C45 Quality Association. We'll be getting going in just a couple minutes. We're going to be discussing CRA audits, and we'll be hearing from a couple of our board members, so just a few more minutes.
Hey everyone, Tom here. While we're waiting, maybe I'll do a bit of housekeeping and some C45 Association announcements. Is that fine, David? Awesome. So welcome everyone. We're excited to talk to you about our topic at hand today, CRA audits. Always a very exciting topic. But while we wait, just a few announcements and some housekeeping. So as far as our announcements, the biggest one I think is the fact that in a few weeks now, on June 7th, our association is hosting the C45 Quality Summit in Hamilton, Ontario. I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to check out c45summit.com. Check out the program, the list of speakers. It's a one-day event packed with a bunch of different sessions, panels, presentations, kind of workshops revolving around quality and regulations, both on the federal and the provincial side. So we have a great lineup of speakers. I believe we have 3 or 4 Health Canada speakers presenting, and then another half dozen of so managers and kind of senior and mid-level kind of employees from Health Canada's cannabis file attending. So it's going to be a great opportunity to network directly with them. We also have the AGLC, the quality department from the Alberta, a provincial distributor, as well as OCS Ontario, coming in to do presentations and panels specifically about their quality program. So again, a great potential to network and learn directly from the people that are, your companies are probably interfacing it with. In addition to that, we have some great kind of industry panels looking at analytical testing, QAP challenges, that sort of stuff. So it's going to be a great event. Tickets are on sale now. I believe the price for the tickets is kind of going up in a few days only. And so obviously lock in those times now. Again, one-day event, breakfast, lunch, and refreshments served throughout the day. Starts at 9 a.m., breakfast is 8 a.m., ends at 5 p.m. We'll probably do a little bit of kind of drinks or a little kind of after party after with anyone that wants to come out. But it should be a lot of fun, and this is the first summit we've had in a few years. So I'll be there. Bridget will be there. A few of our other board members will be there. So it'll be great. So c45summit.com and hit us up or the sponsors up. We might have promo codes or discount codes for discounted tickets. So please give us a message on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, and then we'll hook you up there. The other thing is we have our AGM coming up mid-June. And so we're looking for new board members. We have a few positions opening up. So we're looking for nominations. Again, if you go to our website, c45association.com, you'll be able to see on the newsletter post a link to our nomination. Nominate yourself. If you got an extra 5 hours, kind of a week or a month, depending on how involved you want to be, we're looking for people to continue this association, plan the next summit, continue obviously interfacing with Health Canada and the provinces as we've done in the past. So it's a great way to be involved and represent your industry, your community when it comes to regulations and the regulators. So please, if you haven't nominated yourself, please do so. The deadline is this Friday because we have to send out those nominations and vote for them in a few weeks. So I encourage all of you to send it in. It's easy. Tell us about yourself, why you want to be a member, and submit a picture, and off we go. I believe that's it for me, other than housekeeping. Webinar is being recorded. I believe we might post this one, and David will be kind of leading the event here. At any point, if you have any technical issues, let us know. If you have any Q&A questions or answers or comments, put in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll get to those. And we have about an hour. So I think that's it from me. Bridget, if there's anything else that I forgot, let me know. But I think we can get going here.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And as Tom mentioned, I'm just going to be kind of serving as a moderator. I'll also be fielding any questions. If you do have any questions, you can put that up in the QA function or the chat function, and I'll be letting Bridget and Tom know about those kind of throughout the conversation today. Beyond that, I'm really just looking to let Bridget and Tom kind of lead the discussion. They're the ones with the personal experience with these in-person inspections, so they're going to talk a little bit about that experience, and then, like I say, we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. So, with that said, I think the last few years people have been used to virtual inspections from CRA. It sounds like there is a new push this year to do more in-person inspections, and so that is what we're going to be discussing today. Is how to be prepared for those, what to expect, and what can be learned from those inspections. So with that said, I'm just going to hand things over to Bridget Simmons, who's going to talk about her experience.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. So I am the RP at Safari Flower Company, and I definitely don't handle CRA audits by myself. I'm backed by an amazing QA team, a director, a EUG program lead, and a few QA and QC associates to assist in audits. However, as the primary proponent of the filing of the B300 monthly return, a lot of the pre-question and preparation truly fell to reporting accuracy, which falls squarely on my shoulders most months. In comparison to the Health Canada report, the B300 really aligns with the financial groups of the company as well as the record keeping and QA departments of the company. So that is why I'm coming today to share the knowledge of what we learned and kind of highlights of our agenda. So the in-person CRA audit starts with a notice, and it starts with an agenda of which most officers will send out ahead of their visit. And for our inspection that occurred at the beginning of Q2 of this year, we were presented with an agenda that focused on our cultivation, processing, and we'll say sales for unpackaged goods. It was brought to our attention that we were going to be primarily audited within a period in time for our unpackaged goods throughout all the categories that one would have on the B300. So instead of going through the full agenda of that audit, I think I'll just pull out a few highlights that I thought were either big talking points or ones that we needed lots of preparation on. So within the time period audited, we were really focused on defending our inventory in terms of beginning and closing inventory for unpackaged dried cannabis, unpackaged fresh cannabis, destruction, samples, and sale of unpackaged cannabis to other license holders. Those would be the large topics that for the 2-day agenda were of key focus. I would say that a further highlight was our inspector truly wanted to dive into samples of which non-duty paid were reported on the B300. So these are considered samples that are going to analytical testers, that are going to other license holders, or remain in stock as samples. So samples we have pulled out from batch, but aren't perhaps fully left our facility yet. So I'm going to speak further about the nuances of samples. But just to highlight again, my agenda focused on unpackaged cannabis through fresh, dried, transfers to other license holders, and the more important topic that I'll cover for this webinar, which is non-duty paid samples. With that, I'll hand off to Tom to maybe talk about his agenda of his recent audit and things he'd probably want to highlight in this session.
Awesome. Thanks, Bridget. My experience probably is very similar. So just a bit of context, been in the industry for close to 10 years. Over the last 5 years, have been involved with reporting B300s for multiple companies, primarily one, but more recently two. So I've experienced compiling these B300s and then the B301s. And like Bridget said, and David introduced the topic, last few years since COVID started, they've been all digital audits, and they've been less frequent than I think they even are supposed to have them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget. My understanding is the CRA has a mandate to audit 6 times a year. However, that
Okay.
oh,
I found
6 times a year, but they try to double them up. So it's about every 3 to 4 months that they're supposed to be doing that. And so this is the first time last week I was involved at a client's facility audit here in BC, the first time that they've been on site in years. And to layer on top of that, it seems like the CRA has hired a lot of new or newer people, and their experience with cannabis is perhaps not what maybe we would expect as someone who's been working in the industry for a while. So there was a few challenges there. Much like Bridget's experience, they sent a letter saying, hey, 2 or 3 weeks before we plan to be on site. A week before we come, we need the following documents. They asked about, flowering material. So they asked to document 6 to 12 months prior. So it's May now. They were looking at stuff from last August. So just another reminder to keep those records for a long time and make sure you know how you compiled them, because you're going back 6 to 12 months. They wanted to know, what was sent for analysis, what was received and shipped in Canada, what was exported, if there was any exported, why was this inventory adjusted 6 months ago, destruction. So nothing out of the ordinary, I would say. But when they did come on site, it was, let's go for a tour. And they honed in on a few things. I think the biggest things, and we can talk about this in detail a bit later, the biggest things were, not your standard what was sent to a lab or what was destroyed. They wanted to make sure, for example, you're still using an approved SOP that they approved for destruction and the method that CRA approved. So gentle reminder to everyone, Health Canada doesn't approve your SOPs, but for destruction, CRA does. So if you're changing your destruction method, you have to send that to the CRA and they have to approve it. My experience is they'll pretty much approve anything reasonable and logical, kitty litter, water, soap, compost, but it has to be approved by them. That's a big one. They might also ask, why did you destroy so much? Was that material? Because technically, if there's a material destruction event, a large destruction event, you have to get their permission. That was one of the bigger kind of points that they wanted to make sure. The other one was generally, who are you doing business with, and do you have the CRA licenses? That was a big one that I think a lot of people forget to maybe file those. So, they did ask, where did you get the shipment from? Where did you send this from? Show me their Health Canada license, show me their CRA approval letter or license. And so again, reminder to store that. And then one of the biggest talking points was about ownership versus possession. And for this client of mine, they do third-party processing for other people's cannabis, whether that's milling or packaging. And it kind of opened up a bit of can of worms, especially because there's also this service agreements layer. So I'd want to kind of probably focus on that most after I flip it back to Bridget, because that was confusing, still is confusing, and an interesting discussion, and something that was kind of a regional change to reflect the kind of federal mandate for the Excise Act. So I think I like to spend a bit more time on that. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You went for a tour, here's a bunch of records, let's get into it. Let's go line by line. They'll kind of, they did plant counts, they did inventory checks in the vault, only took an hour or two at this facility. Everything lined up perfectly. So, then they kind of got into the historical records, and they had a few questions, and then they kind of started diving into that. So that's kind of it for me as far as just general context. Then I'll throw it back to Bridget, and I'll dive into the ownership and possession thing after.
All right, thanks. So during our audit period, which is of course a couple months back, They are really truly looking at the accuracy on the B300 to back it up with the records of your opening and closing inventory, especially for the goods that maybe your business focuses on. So Safari is a cultivator. We have fresh plant material, whole plant material, for an opening and closing balance every month. And we have dried cannabis products, opening and closing every month. So having the records to back up your additions and reductions should be in a way that you can recall them up quickly to check the math, the accuracy of the math that's created on the B300 down to the closing inventory. So having your inventory coordinator or inventory associates building those records for that reporting, you should have your records at hand in a spreadsheet, somewhere where you can easily sum and take a look at the total reductions or the total additions. That saved us just having that preparation in hand. For the individual reductions, I identified that they were really trying to home in on samples that are being pulled out for several reasons. Because these reductions, although they could be small, they need to be accounted for. And sometimes it's even the small ones that screw up the math more than large transfers where you can recollect where the transfer went to. But now drilling down into samples. In all of your categories, you may have analytical test samples, and likely you use an inventory management to pull them out of your inventory and remit to a lab. What we got stuck on a point of our audit was that in process, we might pull samples prematurely before they actually leave our facility. We might pull them, they may be categorized as a sample, pulled out, put into a holding bin of some sort, and then maybe you're sending them to a lab in groups. And even if that grouping happens towards the end of the month, you might be technically sending out that sample on November 1st versus October 31st, which technically is a different reporting month. So after we compared all of our technical pulls of samples versus the chain of custodies created with labs being acquisitioned for a test and then actually sent to a lab, that could have fallen over a month end, in which case what we had declared as being pulled out as a lab sample didn't actually leave our hands in that month, but was reported on the B300 as a different month. So that was something that tripped us up on. So take a second look at all your chain of custodies with samples leaving your hands, that they are being reported in the month that they actually are being reported in, not just pulled out of an inventory management system because they're awaiting to be sent out for testing. That's the one thing we got caught on. The total volumes of samples going to labs, the total net weights going to lab was something that was being tested in our hands. So how much did you send to each lab? What was the tally to each lab, and show the proof of the COCs that it had actually gone to those labs. So that was something that wasn't in our agenda to prepare for, something we had to do on the fly, because they are trying to look at samples leaving your hands of which you are not paying duty on because they're categorized as a lab sample. And then the last point about samples is the accuracy on the weights of samples. In some cases, you might be adhering to an SOP to send full testing samples with a certain test weight out to a lab, of which there's a typical weight that you have to send to achieve that test. And then there's maybe the user that pulled that sample is then recording an accurate sample weight that might be plus or minus 5 grams against what the lab is requiring you to send for that test. So there might be a discrepancy in between the lab's COC form of how much you're sending, because there's an automatic weight associated to that sample that must go for that test, versus what actually gets pulled out of the system. And if you do a lot of lab tests, as we do, you might be accumulating a little bit of error all throughout the month. which is explainable if you can defend it. But it is, an area of accuracy of which a CRA agent might be looking for that accurate number versus, the rationale of operations, pulling out plus or minus 5 grams to a net weight versus what the lab is requiring you to send. Sometimes you send a little more depending on the sample type. So the last point about samples leaving for labs would be about the accuracy on the net weight, the month of which you actually send the sample to the lab, making sure it doesn't tip over another reporting month, and then the reporting system to tally up all your samples at the end of the month. Just have a plan for that, have a second check on that one. The word sample in our audit was thrown around, and maybe you throw it around too with your team. Samples going here, samples going there. The word sample is used quite ubiquitously in our group. Samples can mean analytical test samples. They can mean samples going to another license holder to, engage a sale. They could also be words as samples as retains. These words get thrown around in the audit because maybe you're working in operations, the word sample could be used in many contexts. To the CRA, they hear that as something I've got to check as a non-duty paid entry into a form. A retain is a non-duty paid, inventory, but doesn't leave your hands. A sample going to another license holder is considered a non-duty paid sample because it falls within the compliance limit to send it to a license holder, of which there's a license holder that's been that's accredited as an approved supplier. And they have rights to, get a zero PO or a zero cost sample from you in contemplation of a sale if it's unpackaged. So the word sample gets thrown around a lot between teammates. Just be careful when you're talking about samples that you are referring to samples as non-duty paid product that is either going to another license holder to be either analyzed or destroyed, or it's a sample that you're retaining for reasons of compliance. The moment you say you're sending a sample to somebody else, just as casually like that, it could imply that you're sending it to a retailer, could imply that you're sending it to a customer or a medical patient. And then you can get yourself into a loop of, well, you should have paid duty, that should be a duty paid sample. So just be careful of how you use the word sample in an unpackaged manner. It really can only go to an analytical license holder, a cultivator or processing sales license holder in contemplation of a sale, so it remains unpackaged, or it's a sample that is retained on site for compliance and record keeping retained purposes. So the word sample is something that they are watching for, really just simply because the words and the regulations around samples leaving site are a gray area. It's probably one of the most poorly understood areas of the entire cannabis sales cycle. And always want to clarify what type of sample you're talking about. And if it is truly in the unpackaged category, that you say it's a non-duty paid unpackaged sample in contemplation of a sale versus a completely packaged product that might be sent as a zero duty paid, but duty paid to a retailer or another entity evaluating a product. So that would be something in that I would like to highlight as part of my audit, and I will toss it back now to Tom to talk about another feature of highlight for his.
Awesome, thanks, Bridget. And I think what I'm going to spend a few minutes here on is somewhat kind of related to a few things you said about dates and when something was kind of sent versus collected. So maybe to take a step back here, if you're someone who does, oh, before I continue, I see Julia has her hand up. Bridget, do we want to take questions as we're going, or do we want to leave them till the end?
Yeah, sure, if it's goes with the topic.
Okay, Julia, I'm gonna allow you to unmute your mic if you'd like. If you want to say anything right now, by all means, unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Or you can just put your question in the chat or the QA if you want, Julia. And we have one other question in the QA if you guys want to field it now. There's 2 questions, but it's kind of the same question. I could save it for later or read it off now.
Okay. So yeah, Julia, I don't know if your hand's up or not, but just maybe ask something in the Q&A there. Oh, she said that was accidental. Perfect. Okay. So just to take a step back, if you're someone who does the B300s, you're probably also submitting the Health Canada reports or compiling them. I think it's important to understand how they're related and how they're not, because this was kind of, I wouldn't say eye-opening, but it definitely added to further confusion after this most recent audit. So for Health Canada, those monthly reports due in the middle of the month, you're typically operating under the auspices of possession. So if it arrives at your facility that month, if it leaves your facility that month, if it's produced or processed or packaged that month, that's what you're reporting. Fundamentally, that's very easy to compile. Most of you guys are using an electronic inventory system like Elevated Signals, maybe Ample Organics, maybe Microsoft Dynamics. You can filter out those timestamps, say, if that work was done that month, I'm going to report it to Health Canada. And Health Canada operates in kilos, right? For the most part, or packaged units for packaged products. And they do a funny thing where they separate out extracts as kind of topicals, ingestion, or inhalation. So that is different from the CRA, which operates under an ownership type model, and also on edge cases where you're at the beginning or end of a month, like Bridget mentioned, you might ship something out to someone the last day of the month, but they don't receive it until the next day of the month. You would not report that until they received it, until it changed hands, is my understanding. Not only that, but CRA doesn't divide out extracts for ingestion and inhalation. They just call them extracts, and they're approved extracts, and they operate in milligrams of THC. So now you have to layer on the net weight of your bulk or your kind of packaged or filled product, and include your SKU weight, your net weight, and your label claim or your COA, depending on how you operate. So it adds a lot more confusion. But fundamentally, what kind of was the biggest I guess surprise to me was, if my understanding is, if you look at the Excise Act 2001 rather, which what they kind of operate under and enforce, it's a ownership model, which means that if you are an LP, if you're a license holder, imagine Bridget is someone who says, "Yeah, I'll fill your pre-rolls for you. You're gonna send me your bulk flower. I'm gonna make your pre-rolls and send them back to you unpackaged." At no point Bridget or Bridget's company owns the cannabis that she's processing. So for Health Canada, she is physically in possession of it. She would report that. For CRA, they wouldn't consider that ownership, and they don't want to see that on their B300. So it will get confusing, because for Health Canada, you might say, I just received a ton of cannabis, or 100 kilos of cannabis, and I sent it back to someone. There was some processing loss, there was some destruction along the way, there was some whatever, all the things you needed to get to your output on its journey through your facility. CRA doesn't want to know any about that, because you don't own that cannabis. So whether you have a service agreement, which are kind of these newer things in the last year, where the CRA says, hey, you're going to be packaging and excising and labeling for someone, it's the person who owns the cannabis, the particular licensee, as they call it, that's reporting all that, not you. So if you're receiving that cannabis and you're processing and sending it back, they don't want to know that you received it. They don't want to know that you did a processing loss that was destroyed and that was shipped. That's for the owner of the cannabis. So it will get confusing. And never mind if you or, for example, if you ship something out to a province, you're in BC and you're shipping to Ontario, there's a 3 or 4 day journey. If you do it on April 30th, and they receive it on May 2nd, you're not reporting that it left your facility April 30th because you own that until they receive it. So it's just, it, ideally Health Canada CRA records would match up, but they clearly won't in a lot of cases. And what was even more kind of frustrating was I was informed that here in BC, the regional office interpreted this ownership versus possession thing differently up until recently. So even though the headquarters, as they call them, was saying, no, it's ownership versus possession, who owns it, here in BC for the longest time, we're operating under, okay, well, it's just possession, like just report it anyways, up until at some point they decided to change and align with headquarters, which again adds more confusion. So all that is to say, don't take my word for it. Reach out to your local CRA officer every April 1st. You're kind of assigned a new one for the year, for the fiscal year. There's also team leads if you need to escalate. Ask them these questions. My experience is also headquarters. There's a CRA email for headquarters, not your regional office, because they operate under fax or my business account communications or phone, which is frustrating, but it is what it is. But there is an email you can email the CRA for kind of higher level questions, and they'll give you a response typically within a day. And it's quite clear and quite direct. So I encourage all of you, if you have these questions, if you have a service agreement with someone, which means that the CRA has approved some sort of packaging or stamping activity, reach out to them, ask them how they want it reported. If you're processing cannabis on someone's behalf without a service agreement, which is fine for unpackaged stuff, double check how they want that reported and who's reporting that. And those edge cases on when you received a product versus when you shipped it versus when it was delivered, keep that in mind. At the end of the day, it all comes out in the wash, but they might write you a letter or tell you to change things and change your reporting process if they find any inconsistencies between what you're doing and what you should be doing. So that I'll kind of end it there. Maybe there's some additional questions, or if Bridget wants to maybe ask me for some clarity. Hope that was kind of clear enough. But that was kind of the biggest takeaway out of all things is no longer are your Health Canada CRA reports are going to be lining up if you're doing anything remotely kind of moderately advanced to just growing cannabis and selling it or packaging it for yourself. So I'll kind of leave it there. I don't know how that was, Bridget or David, but I think that's the big one for me. Ownership versus possession.
Yeah, no, you're very right. Having that service agreement ready for your audit is key. That service agreement should have a letter that's been approved by the CRA that has the CRA business number of the group that is doing your processing. I did get asked that question and I did have it. And then why you're transferring cannabis to them at $0 if they're simply a service provider and then rendering the product back stamped and excised back for you to sell, because you'd be showing a $0 sale to that processor. All of those are true key, Tom, you're very right. And if you are in an arrangement like that, make sure you've got a folder on your computer ready to have all of those documents in an example transfer at $0 for a service related event, and then how it was transferred back to you, or did they drop ship it on your behalf to a retailing distributor.
And
You should
just
have an example if
yeah,
that is truthfully your business.
and the two supporting documents when it comes to either service agreements that are approved by the CRA or just business arrangements between two companies for unpackaged processing services like filling, like trimming, like whatever extraction maybe. They want to see a contract, a commercial agreement, which clearly identifies, we're going to be processing for this company, but they own it. It's theirs. We're just charging a fee for processing per kilo, per hour, whatever you want. So they wanted to see those, and they wanted to see $0 invoices, like Bridget mentioned. So even if it's part of the agreement, generate an invoice, reference that maybe agreement, put $0 on it, but they want to see that transfer is being done between two parties that are aware of what's going on, and ultimately there's no kind of monetary value associated with that, at least on the transfer. Obviously, the servicing is separate. So yeah, commercial agreements, maybe quality agreements. They don't care about the quality agreement. Maybe they're baked in. You guys have, two together. and then invoices, purchase orders, your standard shipping and receiving logs and paperwork. They wanted to see all that.
Okay. So staying on this topic before we go to some questions, would somebody like to ask a question about service agreements or excise handling of service?
I see Karen's hand is up, so I'm going to allow her to talk. She also has a question on the Q&A next. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much. Hi, Bridget.
Okay.
So this service agreement comment that you're making is something that I've as well faced with another license holder. So they talk about having a service agreement. So let me give you the scenario. It was almost a tripartite agreement. Flour came from one company, which went directly to the processor, who then produced the pre-rolls and then sent those pre-rolls directly back directly to the BCLDB. But the whole initiative was done under the auspices of another license holder. We have the license holder who's then they gave stamps to put on at the processor, and they thought to themselves, we'll just avoid sending the pre-rolls back to the original license holder who was setting up this arrangement to have pre-rolls made, and they bypassed all that, and CRA was not impressed. So in other words, they basically said, you need a service agreement. Yes, you need to identify who is responsible for the stamps and the count. You need to identify who is going to be the processor, yes. And you need to also identify who's going to know who owns the product, as you mentioned, Tom, on your B300. That's great. You are allowed to transfer stamps out as long as somebody is keeping track of them. But where there was a complete failure was that the company who made the pre-rolls and the company who provided the flour to make the pre-rolls bypassed the original license holder, who was in fact commissioning the production of the pre-rolls under their license. Can you make comment about that?
Yeah, sounds like a twisted web everyone's weaving. I just in the chat sent two links from the federal government. One is a memo called EDN 84, and then another one is just a general link to service agreement. So if ultimately what it comes down to is who's owning that, who's remitting the excise, that's who's going to be reporting all that. For example, if I was the one who had this idea to sell products to the province, but I had no capacity to make that on site, or I would source the flour somewhere else. I hired someone else in your example to package and label and stamp everything. I would have to make sure that all of those parties have a service agreement that is approved by the CRA. They have the SOPs that they're going to ask for distributing excise stamps and handling that. That letter is clearly going to spell out that I'm responsible for the excises. I'm responsible ultimately for everything. But if I don't pay, well, my partners are on the hook. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But ultimately, everything has to be kind of figured out a priori prior to doing this and confirmed by the officer or the CRA office or headquarters, whoever you're dealing with. The letter is going to spell everything out. But yeah, they need to, at the end of the day, they want to make sure that what's being sold is being reported and the excise that's remitted is remitted or reported. And so I just think that in this example, the person selling to the LDB, that would, especially if it's packaged, it's their stamps, they're responsible for it, they're reporting everything. The other two license holders would not technically report that they received the dried cannabis, that they processed it, that they packaged it, that they stamped it. Nothing. All this has to go back to the particular licensee as outlined in that memo and the letter of approval letter, and that's who they're kind of going after. And then it gets complicated because now if that person is being audited, right? Like imagine I'm being audited, but none of the processing or activities are done on my site. they're going to say, well, let's go back to this month. You said you sold 1,000 pre-rolls or whatever, 1,000 units, and you owe us $10,000. You're going to say, I have no records of that. They're going to say, but you need those records. You're reporting it. You need those records from your partners showing, proving to us that they received the cannabis on your behalf, that you purchased it, that you stamped it, that, that you sold it to them and all that. So all I'm going to say is try to minimize the number of people involved. And there has to be absolute transparency and contemporaneous sharing of documents at the end of the month. Hey, I just did this for you. Here's all the records you're going to need, scans and spreadsheets to show and prove to the officer who's inquiring in 6 to 12 months when you're being audited that this is what was done and this is where it was done and this is what you owe. So long story short, keep all records, copies, and archive that, because you're going to be confused and inevitably when in 6 to 12 months you're being audited, you're going, I don't know, this was not done on my site, and there's new people and I have no idea why I reported this. Have that ready, have it archived, ready to go when you file a B300.
Yeah,
It gets
exactly.
even more complicated, not to layer it on. There's some companies that are on quarterly reporting intervals. So now you're not reporting monthly. You're baking in 3 months worth of data into a single report. So teasing that out, 3 months worth of sales to the exact shipment that you didn't even do on your site, but you're reporting because you have to report that. That's a challenge. So, do what you got to
Only
do
as good as
internally.
your most accurate partner in the link.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
the links. You're only as good as the most accurate.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they might not be that accurate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's why you're offloading all that work to them, because you don't want to deal with that, but you're going to inevitably have to defend that. So, keep records and be your own worst critic, right? Operate under an audit ready. This is everyone should operate under an audit ready scenario. At any point, if someone comes in and asks you these questions, yep, here it is. I don't have to search for it. Here's the binder. Here's the folder. Here's the PDF showing everything. It's been reviewed. It's been approved by my team. We're good. Do you have any questions? No. Perfect. So easier said than done with limited resources.
All right, there's some good questions here in the chat. We'll cover a few of them because we're coming on to quarter two. The talk about excise stamps. I think this is a good question. How do you report that ones that have been applied to products and then removed? This is actually, I did have a very good learning moment here, Karen, and another person asked a similar question. So excise stamps that are in your possession, on products in your possession that have not left your site and you have not reported them as a sale yet, you can remove them from products. You can technically do a rework, but every stamp needs to be accounted for because technically you haven't paid duty on it yet. So you have to carefully take it off. If you damage them, you have to properly report them as damaged on a damaged form. And that is subject to destruction by CRA because that stamp has not had duty paid. So in that case, that's in a case of a product that you've stamped to a province but hasn't left your site nor been sold. That stamp is controlled, is a controlled substance, treated like a controlled substance. It requires a rework SOP that has been approved. It requires counting and proper destruction if it has been ripped off in the process of reworking. Now the other case, it actually left your site. It was sold with a stamp on it. It then came back to your site, either a return from a government board or a store, and then you've chosen to take the stamps off and rework the product, take it all out of the case, rework and restamp it. In this case, this was something that I did not know until my audit. In this case, you can take the stamp off. It is assumed that it is going to be destroyed because you are reworking the product, actually destroying the stamp. And in this case, because you've already reported it and paid duty, technically this stamp actually is no longer a controlled product. And you can actually just destroy them in regular ways, like garbage, shredders, without having CRA to witness this.
That's right.
So
But the caveat being, because you paid duty when it left your site, you file a B301 to get the money back. You get a refund, and you have to have records showing it came to your site
Yeah.
and you destroyed them, right? So that's the
yeah, you
caveat.
have to keep that record should
Yeah.
you want a refund. But I'll give you an example. Like one case coming back, you may not file for a refund. There's a lot of work in filing for refunds. Maybe for a small pre-roll case, you're not going to do that. So in this case, these stamps can be destroyed by just regular counting and just destroyed in any other way, like a garbage. They assume that as you are reworking, you can actually rip off the stamp in the appropriate way, and it is truly to be disposed of. So if you are taking back a large load and you're going to restamp products, and then you are going to file for a new stamp, put a new province stamp, and then out it goes, then you are paying duty on the next round of reworking and sale. So the old stamp is in the garbage. The new stamp is obviously record kept and is now true currency. That goes out and you are, of course, paying duty on that. So those are the two cases for reworking products. To file for a refund, you need to have your reworking SOP. You need to actually have the reworking form if there was an like a quality and compliance event around reworking. You need to have all your RTV data if it was a return to vendor scenario or a return from a processor or another license holder. You need to have a purchase order. So you need to have your gauntlet of justification to apply for that rebate, and then you truly wait until it's your turn to be reviewed.
Yeah. And in your first case there, Karen, you asked about how to report that. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because on the B300 reports for the stamps, I believe they say, okay, what did you start with? What was your opening stamp inventory for each jurisdiction or province or territory? Then how many were received? So, you order 5,000, 10,000, you say how many were received. Then you say, they ask you, how many did you apply stamps to? So let's say in a month you applied 5,000, but in that same month, or maybe next month, you say, you know what, we got to rework these. We got to restamp them for another province. There is nothing, I believe, on the B300 that says you've basically stamped them, taken them off, and then restamped them. So you have to just keep internal records, because what's going to happen is you are going to peel those off, or you're going to cut them out. You're going to file them in a bag or in a photo album or something, saying this was for this month, all these events, we applied them and we peeled them off and we reapplied them, and then they left the facility. So at some point, they're just going to say, how come you have so many damaged stamps or reused stamps? And you have to say, because of these events. There's a few damaged during the excise stamping, but 2 months later, these weren't selling. Ontario wanted them instead of BC, so we cut out all the bags, repackaged them with Ontario stamps. You just have to keep those internal records. There's nothing on the B300 that says that you are reporting reworking internally. When they're out and come back in, then that's a rework. That's a B301 refund. That there's some, there's specific reporting on that. You ask for a refund for the excise remitted, but internally, the B300 just says, how many did you have? How many did you get? How many did you apply to products? How many do you have left is the balance out. So just long story short, keep good records internally and be able to, on a monthly basis, reconcile everything. And at the end, why do you have 1,000 damaged or previously used stamps? Well, here's why. Because here's the record from this event on this day that contributed to this amount. And then when they're on site next, you say, can we destroy these now? They're worthless, and I need to be able to order more stamps, and then they'll destroy them with you. And as a reminder, you can't destroy stamps without the physical presence of a CRA officer.
Unless you've already paid duty on them.
Unless you pay duty, then they don't care.
Yeah, if you've already paid duty and it's returned, ripped off in the rework, those don't require CRA destruction witness. If it never left your site and you're just simply reworking the stamp because you overstamped for a product, for a province, those are not duty paid, they do want records of
Yeah.
that. You're not allowed destroying those. No different than when you get a reel from CBN, the Canadian banknote, and a few are not good in there. You have to keep those, and those also are subject to CRA
Yeah.
destruction.
Guys, we only have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to jump in with these. There's one comment I just wanted to read out. This said from Cindy Williams Gibson. They've also asked us for photos of the destroyed stamps and product and records showing that the product was returned to the bulk lot prior to being repackaged. And then I wanted to give a couple minutes opportunity to respond to Janelle's question. Is there a standard for samples that are sent or used in expos or events for excise? So we've talked a lot about all the other types of samples. We haven't really drilled down too much into the direct to retailer samples.
Yeah, I can start on that one. That's a great question. All right, to have samples for retailers or to bring to expos, you need to have an excise stamp on that product. You need to have reported that excise stamped product on your B300. You can be reporting a $0 sale for that stamped product, which means that it is a sample that is not being sold through the distribution channels or models. I'll give an example. You know, you're going to Alberta to, you know, liaise with a bunch of retailers. You have to bring packaged samples that have an excise stamp that have been reported on the B300 as going to a retailer, but it could be reported as a $0 sale. Or say, for example, you have a case that you're going to give away out. You can report them as a $0 sale to the CRA, but it must contain the stamp.
Bridget, quick question there. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. So BC has their rule about a nominal fee. Would that relate to CRA reporting in terms of cost?
Yeah, I guess some of the provinces have their own rules on what a sample fee is.
Gotcha.
Whatever it is, it has to be reported as what you're monetizing. But Saskatchewan, for example, you can bring a $0 sample to a store. Is it just the rule in that province as an example? But it has to be reported. So any stamp leaving your site has to be reported, and the sale is either $1 or $0 or whatever it truly was. It has to be reported.
Janelle, does that answer your question? You can raise your hand if you wanted to follow up. And then it looks like Cindy Williams Gibson maybe had. Looks like Janelle has a question. I'm gonna let her jump in real quick.
And before she does, I just posted a link to our blog where we asked the CRA directly last year about samples and stamps. This was in June of last year, so exactly almost 12 months ago. Take a look at that. That'll give you some information. And of course, there's the email there that'll also include to the CRA. So what I always encourage everyone to do is if you have a question, ask them specifically and directly so that you're not you know, relying on hearsay from the C45 Quality Association to make your decisions. You'd do it based on what they kind of say. Go ahead, Janelle.
Did you still have a question, Janelle?
Oh, she says thank you. That answered my question. Okay.
Cindy Williams. Did you have a quick question, Cindy?
Nope, we didn't.
Okay.
Nope.
So I think we've only got a couple minutes left. Tom and Bridget, do you want to just kind of close things up with any final thoughts here?
Yeah, my thought,
Okay.
very quickly, and then I'll let Bridget have the last kind of word there. When in doubt, talk to your regional office, get it in writing. There's that email to the CRA that I just posted. Email them. Like I said, they're great. CRA is quick, very clear. They'll ask for references, ask for interpretation. You know, don't rely on other people or what you hear. Just go right to the source. Keep good records. And, you know, at the end of the day, as long as you're not conducting any fraud, the CRA is pretty understanding, just like Health Canada. They'll guide you the right way. They might ask you to resubmit or just moving forward, change things. But don't lie. keep good records, and you should have no issues. And then I'll just remind everyone, C45 Summit, please share that with your friends and colleagues, especially in Ontario. Get tickets, and also nominate yourself for a board position this Friday. So that's it for me. Bridget, last word. Go for it.
Yeah, you will have some weight discrepancies somewhere. It is inevitable. I think having your team with you, knowing how to defend against the, occasional human error, weights that should have been reported in 1 month, but actually fell into the next month. We found that we actually had a lot of collaboration. We had 3 officers with us because 1 was in training. We had a lot of collaboration for us to figure out our own numbers and justify why we were doing certain practices. That was very helpful. And then I would say, get prepared to make sure your opening and closing balances are all justified in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere.
One last quick question Martin Johnston asked in the chat. I'm not sure if either of you have an answer for. How does Ontario treat packaged sample sales? Either of you have an answer for that?
Truthfully, in Ontario, I have the most fear because of the monopoly of the OCS. In Ontario, I buy my own products and then give them out. So I will buy a case from a friendly retailer that might get me a good deal on a Tuesday, and then I give them to another retailer to, spur sales. I do that in that province because it is very complicated and I don't want to be known as giving out something incorrectly. I would say the easiest provinces to really have great traction with $0 sales would be Manitoba, Saskatchewan. These have had more success of doing that, clearly because there's just no board in between you and the customer.
I'll use that opportunity. Also, I'm just hearing the beginning of conversations here in British Columbia that the BC government, the provincial regulator, is starting to look closer at sampling procedures here as well, especially at events, and ensuring that the retailers are doing their due diligence in terms of documenting how they're receiving those. And I imagine we'll see that more in some of these provinces. There was this big push for product sampling over the last year or so. Now I think provinces are starting to catch up. It sounds like CRA and Health Canada are starting to catch up too. So I think the theme to take away from this whole conversation here is ensure that you are keeping immaculate records throughout that entire process that match up with everything ideally. Okay, well, with that said, we have to hop over to our board meeting now, but we really thank all of our participants for joining us today. If anyone has any questions, they can always follow up with us online, either on our website or our email. And we hope to see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David, for hosting. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David. Good
Bye,
job,
everybody.
Tom. Bye, everybody.